We're live.
And I hope we're going live here. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and my apologies for the brief delay here, experiencing technical issues. But again, welcome. My name is Joseph Beal. I am the founder of the Gotham Philosophical Society. We're a New York City nonprofit with the aim of trying to bring philosophy outside of the college classroom and into the lives of New Yorkers, kind of into their daily lives. Part of that includes working with New York City youth, and we have the Young Philosophers of New York program, where we do after school philosophy sessions and trying to get into schools. We think young people have lots of big ideas and big thoughts, and we want to give them the opportunity and the time and the space to reflect on it. I am also a father of 3 New York City public school students. I have an 8th grader, a 7th grader, and a 2nd grader. These experience right now with remote learning in this kind of time of crisis, health crisis, a psychological crisis. I have been forced to reconsider my own relationship to them and their education, my role as a teacher that I've been somewhat thrust into now, being home with my students who are learning from home. And I have lots of questions about it, and it's filled me with concerns and doubts and some uncertainty. And so I'm very, very thrilled then to be joined by Ariel Sykes and Jessica Davis, 2 philosophers, 2 educators, to help try to make sense of this. So I'm going to hand it off to Ariel and to Jessica to introduce themselves. Ariel, who's been a facilitator in Young Philosophers of New York, is going to facilitate our conversation. So thank you very much to both of you for joining.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for arranging this and making all the technology happen so we can be live on YouTube and Facebook today. My name's Ariel Sykes. I'm the assistant director at the Ethics Institute, which is located at Kent Place School, which is a private K-12 school for girls in Summit, New Jersey, non-religious private school. And I'm also an endorsed practitioner of the Institute for Advancement of Philosophy for Children, which is located at Montclair State University. I'm really excited to be here to talk about what my experiences have been as somebody who works in a K-12 private school and who's focused on trying to encourage our teachers, our parents, our faculty and staff to think ethically around some of the big issues that are coming up right now for everyone.
Thank you.
Great. And my name is Jessica Davis. I am happy to be joining from Baltimore, Maryland. I'm currently a visiting assistant professor of philosophy at Notre Dame of Maryland University. And I also am a mother to a middle school student. She's a 6th grader. And so I have some perspective from both sides of the table here, and I'm really excited to join.
Great. So just a reminder to our watching audience that you can leave us a comment on YouTube or Facebook if there's any questions or topics that you want us to talk about surrounding the theme of teaching and learning during a pandemic. But I thought for the time being that we could start off with each of us talking a little bit about how our current experiences have informed our thoughts about teaching and learning more broadly. So Joe, would you like to start?
Well, I guess part of the experience that I'm having now is one, again, of being somewhat thrust into kind of the position of being a quasi-teacher of my children, and particularly my youngest, who's 7, 2nd grade. So he requires technical assistance for sure. And helping him understand and process some of the assignments that he has, and certainly with motivation and attention. So playing kind of the role of like herding him into doing the work, keeping him focused, and also being concerned about not pushing him too hard, trying to respect his own anxieties with respect to this, and how to balance that. My middle schoolers are somewhat a little bit more like hands off, but I still have some issues and roles there. I am a teacher. I've taught college for many years. I've also done workshops with young people, but this is actually somewhat of a different experience, and again, one that was not planned. So I have feelings of anxiety, feelings of doubt about whether I'm doing the right thing, whether I'm pushing them enough, whether I'm pushing them too much. And so trying to think how I should approach this, what their education should look like for the next number of months, foreseeable future. That's been primarily what's been on my mind.
I want to ask a follow-up question, Joe.
Sure.
You started off using the phrase quasi teacher, but then you gave us all of these qualifications of you as an educator. So why do you think that you use that term when first talking about it?
Well, because with respect to my children, I am not their teacher. I am an educator, and when I walk into a college classroom, or I walk into a designed workshop, for young people, I have a particular role. They understand that. We establish that, and I'm quite comfortable with that. But I'm not a homeschooler, and so I am not my children's teacher. Someone else plays that role. Someone else has that responsibility. Someone else is telling them, here's the assignment, here's what I would like from you, here are my expectations. And I have a parental role of helping him to meet them. But now I have more responsibility, more of an educational responsibility. And there's the psychological dynamic between myself and my children is something that is not present between the teacher and student. So that makes it much more complicated and fraught at times. So, it's not, you want it to be, let's get down to business, let's do the work we have. But there are many other layers involved. So it's harder for a parent, I think. It's certainly my own experience. So that's the quasi. Yeah.
Jessica, how is what Joe's saying resonating or different for you as a parent and a teacher?
Well, to speak first to being a teacher at the present moment, I would just, note that the content of what we focus on in the classroom has taken a backseat to the form, right? So the form of teaching and the form of our classroom has changed. And so now the form is really is the focus. So just having that Zoom meeting a few times a week with my intro to philosophy students, for example, it gives us a way to connect. And the content of what we're discussing or reading is not as important anymore. So the relation itself, it seems to be kind of what matters the most as we're finding ourselves in this situation. And I think that my daughter's experience is the same. So, as much as I can try to fill that role of her teachers, she misses her teachers, she misses her peers. And so those relationships are really being missed right now. The content, it can be interesting for my daughter sometimes. She is engaged with the content, but what she really misses is that relation with her teachers and with her peers, and I can't replace that. And I wanted to also note that in terms of what I'm learning from this, I also am being reminded that I can learn from my daughter. So, you know, we try to take on the role of teacher in this moment, but she's teaching my husband and I just as much. So she's teaching us about resilience. She's teaching us about creativity. And she's reminding us of the importance of, you know, the perspective and unique energy that each person can bring to a dynamic. So it's not just a one-way street in terms of teaching in our household right now.
What you just said, Jess, makes me think of, I don't know if either of you have read anything by Nell Noddings about caring in education and about the importance of like a relationship, the relationship between teacher and student and among students in a classroom. And it seems like, at least also in my context, that this emphasis on keeping community and, you know, attending to the needs and honoring that relationship with your students is really important right now, and perhaps was always there, but maybe not something that we noticed or valued before or as explicitly.
Yeah, I think oftentimes in education we're tasked with delivering content, and the person delivering the content kind of it's not, the person isn't deemed as important. It's the content that we're meant to deliver. When we're finding now that the person, the unique person that you're in that relation with, matters a whole lot.
Mm-hmm. And it can matter in that sense with like you, Joe, where all the different roles that you play get mushed together, and that becomes complicated.
It does.
Can't compartmentalize in the same ways as we might have.
Absolutely. And definitely with respect to my youngest son, and this is something that there are different modes or different ways in which the remote learning is doing. So is taking place in my children's school. It's a public school. They are not having any standard lessons are not via Zoom or Google Meet or anything like that. They're not synchronous. So they have like assignments posted on a daily basis in different subject areas. However, for my second grader on Fridays, the teacher actually reads a story. She sets up a Google Meet, and so they get to see her and interact with her, and that is, I think, speaks to what Jessica was saying. The personality is extraordinarily important. The relationship that the teacher has. It's not just the content. You know, it's the person who's delivering that content. It's the relationship that's being formed. And so, yes, being a father complicates that. You know, and I can't replicate what the teacher has created and established over 5-6 months. You know. So, you know, that just kind of like adds to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it goes beyond just understanding what the assignment is or the skills to get you through the assignment or the lesson. It's like, what are the, you know, community standards, relationship, what the space also looks like. I think that's one thing that I'd like us to think about too is we think of school, you know, as teachers and students, but it's also the like physical space, and we're now removed from that in our own homes. And so I'm wondering from both of you how your reflections about the space of the school has become more vivid for you, or things that you've thought about questioning, challenging, really valuing as parents and educators now that we don't have that central space where we, you know, we go and meet with our students or where we drop our, you know, children off.
Well, from my side, I'm aware of the fact that, you know, there isn't an equality in terms of the space that students have access to now. And so some students are, you know, sharing technology, they're sharing small apartments. My daughter builds a fort in our in the room that I'm in now, so I'm kind of surrounded by a fort that my daughter created, and so I think that having a common space at a public school or at your university helps to bring people into a community in a way that's not possible when we're working remotely. So it gives a shared experience that I think is valuable.
I completely agree. It's the impact of having a dedicated space for, it sets community standards, it sets expectations. This is what we do in this space, and we're all now in a space where all sorts of other expectations have been created, and now we're being asked. Our children are being asked to overlook those, the standard expectations that they have of being in their own room or being in their apartment or their house, and just make a switch and say, okay, like all the things that you did in school, you should be doing them now, here in this space, and that's hard for them. And there's the onus on parents to try to, or the sense that the parents feel, I've got to make it this way, and I think it's really good for you to mention that, because I hadn't been thinking about the effect of what the classroom looks like and what the classroom means. I wasn't really thinking about that with respect to my own children, but I think it's a very, very important point. And it's a challenge for both parents and students.
I think something that I've been thinking about in terms of space too is that how space kind of dictates what's acceptable in school, like what learning should look like, right? Whether your classroom looks like lined desks, or whether you sit in a communal circle, or whether there's comfy chairs, an area where you relax, or what it looks like to be attentive. And I've noticed on virtual remote learning context now that I have to rethink what paying attention looks like, or what acceptable body language is. And I'm wondering whether that's going to translate after this is all over and we go back together, because there's people who believe, if you are paying attention, you look a particular way. But that's harder when we're doing it remotely. We have more freedom in some ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
The teacher's not right there.
Yeah, and that does bring up something I wanted to mention, which is that, despite the difficulties that we're finding with remote learning, I have come across students who are appreciative of some of that freedom that's afforded. So, for example, I've assigned an activity where we meet in a website called draw.chat. And it's a platform where you log into a specific site, and the participants are anonymous, and they can add to a document visually, and then also chat in a chat room. And I've put prompts in there for students to talk about philosophical ideas, and then they're able to chat anonymously. And many students are really appreciating the freedom that this gives them, whereas in the regular classroom, they weren't confident enough to share their thoughts about these ideas, and the anonymous platform gives them that chance to really share what they're thinking. So it's interesting. I'm thinking about how that can be brought into a class once we're back to face-to-face.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. My own college classes, we're using Blackboard as interactive, and so there's no anonymity. You have to log in, and though you you can opt to have video on or not, and overwhelmingly the majority of them opt to not have the video on. But nevertheless, exactly who's in there. You can't say anything or chat, type anything without knowing who it is. So it's kind of interesting, the different platforms, the different technology, how that impacts that.
Yeah, and rethinking what kind of engagement and how do we assess engagement? Because I know like those platforms also allow you to track like whether or not the student even opened the file, right? So like there's a level of privacy that's totally can be violated. That perhaps we trusted our students to do the readings and come to class prepared, and we could like look at their books to kind of get a sense of whether they did or didn't engage with reading. And now we have technology that allows us to see, oh, well, you logged in this time and you read the assignment. So, there's an expectation there. Perhaps.
That's right.
Yeah. I'm wondering if we could shift into thinking about how we see our work in philosophy helping us think about the different questions around teaching and learning. So we've talked a little bit about what our experiences are like, but how do we bring in our expertise in philosophy to help guide us through this time, and any advice that we might have for parents who are watching right now?
Jessica, you want to start?
Yeah, well, I think that philosophers sometimes get pegged as being pessimistic or negative, or asking questions that kind of will put people in a state of unrest or discomfort. And in a sense, we, as philosophers, we do have experience with kind of cultivating those feelings of discomfort. And now we're in a space collectively where we're feeling that discomfort and feeling some of that uncertainty. So I think that there's certainly a breadth of material within the history of philosophy that deals with feelings of despair, questions about life and death, and what's really important in life. So there's certainly a lot of material that's available if you want to consult material.
Well, I guess with respect to myself, I suppose picking up on one of your initial points about kind of dealing with kind of discomfort, we have questions like we're uncertain about what we're doing here, what we're doing, with our children's education, how we're supposed to, or our own teaching. We're teaching classes right now. They've been moved to remote platforms. There aren't any easy answers. It's kind of like the doubt, being unsettled, kind of is what, in a sense, prompts us to think about, well, how do I make sense of it? What is going on here? How can I move into a better position to get to have a better sense of what's going on, to act more effectively with respect to it, to get to a more comfortable position, kind of more of a sense of, okay, this is how I'm going to deal. And I think, philosophy is at its heart is that it's kind of, it involves kind of, it develops the skills and the capacities to be somewhat more comfortable with our discomfort, to acknowledge that there are questions that do not have easy answers. And so trying to be somewhat, forgiving of myself, but also encouraging my children to speak their mind, to let's work this out. Let's try to make sense of what we're in. And because I think, yes, we can go to various materials, and particularly the older the children are and the families, we could try to find resources. Maybe we should put some of those in the comments when we're all done, some of those sorts of resources. But certainly with younger children, middle school children, elementary school children, I think getting them to talk, getting them to put out there what their thoughts are, what their concerns are, and then kind of just with no promise of like, okay, we're going to get the right answer, just to give them the space and to collaborate with them in trying to see what we can make sense of. I think is kind of at the heart of the philosophical activity, rather than don't worry, let's just we'll do this and it'll all be fine, or what have you, or just pay attention to your math. I want to give them the opportunity to wonder and worry, and see what they can, if they can, in a sense, calm themselves through exploring their doubts and uncertainty.
Yeah, so then it seems like something that philosophy adds is like those of us who have had practiced in philosophical training, dialogue, reflection, have those skills that we can rely on right now, right? So like we're used to being uncertain and we know kind of what to do. And for some of us, it might feel like second nature. Like I don't even have to think that like right now I'm asking myself a question and, examining possibilities, and I spend some time reflecting and then I'm going to try something out. Like that's just something that's part of who I am now as a result of studying philosophy. So I'm wondering, like, I'm not wondering. I think that lends leverage for why teaching philosophy and doing philosophy with kids is really important, because if we had more spaces and opportunities to do that with them prior to now, we might be more equipped. And because, when we're stressed out, when we're anxious, when we're in traumatic or crisis situations, trying out new things, especially new thinking skills, might be really hard and maybe not reasonable to expect of people right now. But if we had prepared ourselves prior to this, that perhaps we'd be more, able to collectively do some of that philosophical reflection and dialogue. Yeah, I think that for me, philosophy right now is helping me do the reflection like internally, because I'm, spending a lot of more time with myself. And it's also helping me navigate those really difficult conversations with people in my lives who have very different opinions about what is the best way forward, either as, practical family matters or more like larger societal questions about, when do we open up the country and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, also the situation kind of forces us into a place where we can allow ourselves, students included, our children included, to be the philosophers that they naturally are. So we have for once some time where it's not filled with content. It's not filled with externally imposed schedules. And so students can sit in their living room and just think, and they can be bored. They can be put into that place where they can become curious and follow that curiosity to an activity that will occupy them, or to, just, it actually gives us that freedom that our society in some ways squelches when we have all of the order that's been lost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, opportunity to really figure out what it is that you're interested in, or what you value, or what maybe you didn't really care about and don't miss anymore. I also think about, like, related to that, just like how this time, like, we can use the philosophy to think about the hard decisions that we have to make right now, but we can always use it to like think forward and being hopeful and idealistic. So like, given where we are now, what kind of world do we want to live in? And how can we be intentional when things shift again to help make that possible, so that we don't kind of go back to that overscheduled, over-ordered, very busy, not being present type of schedule that we were in perhaps before.
Yeah, this gives us the space to ask ourselves whether all of the things we were up to were really important.
Mm-hmm. And dream about what we would want to do differently when we have the opportunity. Joe, sorry.
Yeah, I just want to, I guess, echo what both of you are saying. I mean, I think, your question, Ariel, about what kind of world do you want to live in? I mean, that's, it's not a scientific question. It's a philosophical one at its core. What do we think is important? What do we think is valuable? What this very activity of like looking at the world as we find it right now, the world, our educational practices, our family dynamics, whatever the case may be, looking at it and saying, why is it the way that it is? Could it be better? What's missing from it? And how do I go about trying to change it into something better? That requires thinking. It doesn't require an app. It requires like real creative thought, critical thought, and that's the essence of philosophy, kind of in directing it, being intentional about finding a way forward to a world that is better than the one that we are currently in. And the process of doing that, I think, Ariel gets at, you said, makes you more comfortable with yourself, being, engaging in philosophy, engaging in philosophical thought, reflection, makes you somewhat calmer with yourself and to be able to think about these things. But it also helps you communicate with others, as you said, to hear what other people are saying who have very, very different views, and to listen respectfully and to actually hear what they're saying, and to try to make sense of it and try to see how differences can be bridged. And if they can't be bridged, to actually be clear about what the differences are, rather than assuming what the differences are. I think those are very, very important civic skills, skills for well-being. And I don't see any activity that encourages them more than philosophy. So I think the more we can do it with our children, the better.
Yeah, I think I like this idea of being intentional and specifically around like dialoguing with others, because we as parents or educators might feel uncomfortable about talking some of the big issues that right now is raising, especially around life and death. And so our tendency, right, is to try to ignore it or to not engage with it. And especially don't do it with like a large group of people, because then you can't control anything, right? So we're afraid of what might happen or what might unfold. And I think that like philosophy can help us create that space intentionally and create a structure around that space where it can be safe for exploring. Because I think that if we don't do that for ourselves or for our students or for our children, that we end up seeking out those spaces and that are perhaps more unhealthy, right? Like we become echo chambers on our social media platforms, or it comes out as anger over a dinner table conversation that has nothing to do with what's actually bothering any of us. Or we kind of turn into ourselves, and that can, close ourselves off, and that's not important, helpful right now either. So like thinking of philosophy as being able to provide that space to work through those things that are really difficult that maybe we wouldn't normally talk about with other people, but finding creative ways around it. Like how can we talk about what we're afraid of through something else, so that like that, all that stuff, all that heaviness in our minds and our hearts are kind of is let go after that conversation, so that we can be present in the next moment, right? Like I think of, as a teacher, if I have something that's really bothering me, it's really hard for me to be in a classroom and teach. And then if that issue that's really bothering me comes up, I have to do a lot of internal regulation to be like, all right, I'm not getting on my soapbox right now. I'm not telling you all what I think you need to do, right? The space is about cultivating all of your thinking. So we all need those outlets where we can say like, this is what I'm really thinking right now. And I want to know what you're thinking. And I want us to work together so I can understand you. And maybe I can like understand something about myself that I didn't know before we had a conversation about it. Yeah, so I would encourage parents and educators to find spaces to have those conversations, even if they might be hard.
I completely agree, and this goes back, I think, to something you were saying earlier, Ariel. The more that the earlier we do this with students, with our own children, it's the more practice that they get, the more time they have to develop these skills, so that when they are first and foremost for coping with their lives now and being able to talk with their peers as they go through school, but they're going to inherit this world. They're going to be making these decisions in the future about what the world looks like. Again, philosophical questions about what ought and ought not be the case, what we should and shouldn't be doing. Those decisions require certain skills and capacities, and it's philosophy that really enables them. So the sooner we get them to do it, the more comfortable they will be trying to navigate issues and problems that don't have right and wrong, singular right and wrong answers. The earlier we get them to do it, the better, more effective they will be at answering them when it's going to be their responsibility to answer them. And I think, my own judgment, my own sense is that our difficulty in answering these questions now is a result of the fact that most of us only started really engaging in philosophical activity by the time we got to college. Which, if we had been doing this a lot earlier, maybe we'd be better at trying to figure these questions out now. So.
Yeah, I guess the one silver lining, well, there's many, but one possible silver lining of this moment is that, I come from a belief that children think about these questions at a very young age and that we should be engaging with it. But perhaps, sometimes that's a hard sell for people, parents and teachers. And so the fact that we're in this crisis moment and it's so prevalent in everyone's lives, like we're actually seeing, we can't deny the fact that our children are asking these questions. Maybe we could have ignored that before, but there seems a sense of urgency now that we can't ignore that, and that we need to honor what Jess was talking about, which is like those innate philosophical abilities that everybody has, that we just haven't exercised as much yet. Jess, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I was just thinking, the addition to philosophical questions about life and death and meaning, there's also what's come out of this for me is the importance of critically digesting media. So there's, in the really early days of this, there was a delay in terms of people that I knew getting the information that was important. So learning about the virus and the importance of social distancing, for example, that took some time based on how people engage with information, how they reflect on it, whether or not they seek it out. And so this is also an important time for the practice of critical thinking to be highlighted, because it's all too easy for people to believe everything that they hear or see, or to reject it all. And so being able to think about what knowledge is, what it means for someone to have knowledge of something, and how that ought to inform our daily lives is really important.
Yeah, I think it similarly, something that's come up for me is like how do we sift through like the different information. And a group of middle school students at my school asked the question, I think, which is pretty much about this, is how much information is too much information? Like we have so much information right now. We've taught them perhaps already like how to figure out what a credible source is, but when you have a whole bunch of credible sources, like and people are telling you to take a break because maybe it's causing you anxiety. Like, how do you know when it's too much information and what information you should be seeking out and who you should be seeking it out from? And I think the other thing that it's made me think of, like, finding examples of how, you know, there are different people in my life that, you know, will listen to different people and are more persuaded by certain ways of communicating information. So I think that it's made me appreciate more that how you deliver information is really important, and like knowing that about yourself, like how do I tend to like explain myself to other people, and what do I know about that person in terms of whether they're going to receive that information is really, really important, especially right now, you know, public health and safety. And I think it's brought me back to this realization that like stories, personal stories, personalizing things is a very effective way of communicating. And it's not something that I tend to do as often, because as a philosopher, a very logical thinker, and I think about like clear, strong, convincing arguments, and perhaps that's not the most effective with many people in my life right now. That those personal stories are the ones that are going to convince them to take something seriously.
Yeah, I think to jump in, meeting people where they are. Really, I think one of the, to me, and this is something that's taken me a while as well to, I suppose, appreciate, that maybe one of the most important philosophical, keep coming back to this word skill or you know, capacities or things that we do, is listening. Really just be quiet and listen to what somebody's saying. Hear them. Let them say what's inside, and if possible, help them to get it out, to articulate it. And then you can look at it and try to see, you know, why do they think that? And you know, and maybe this goes, you know, this is part of the, like the Socratic method, you know, of you know, asking, you know, the idea is it's within you, the knowledge is kind of like within you to draw it out, but being kind of open and receptive rather than, I've got this picture, I've got my judgments about whatever the situation is, and as soon as you start talking, if it starts to, you know, have any friction or conflict with that, I'm shutting down and I'm just not hearing you. That's profoundly unphilosophical, and it's profoundly unhelpful to dealing with each other. It's not good for relationships, and it's not good for establishing relationships with people we don't know. So
we have a few more minutes left. I'm hoping that taking another shift in a different direction is okay with everyone. But I was hoping that we could end our conversation together today just being hopeful and thinking about like how this moment can help us think differently or progressively or idealistically about teaching, learning, and schooling in the future. So I'm wondering if either of you have any reflections on your experiences and how you hope to see things move forward.
Well, one thing for me would be, you know, even as a philosopher, I do try to, there's space for philosophical questioning, but I think that I still could change the structure of my classes so that there's more space for uncertainty and for just, you know, emergent questions, and I don't know, just making more space in the syllabus. That would be one thing for me. And I think for my daughter, and just, we're going to have so much more appreciation for the relationships in our lives. And so I think me paying more attention to those and showing our gratitude toward people, I think, is going to be really important for us.
Mhm. Yeah, as an educator, I'm hopeful that the profession is going to be honored in a different way. Whether or not that translates into any like actual benefit to me as an educator is less important as people recognizing the importance of what a school does for the relationships and for our children and for us as adults, I think. What about you, Joe?
I think what I hope is that educators and myself, but also thinking about our schools, my children's schools. This is a profound experience for students, and when they go back, my hope is that educators don't try to just, okay, let's get back to normal. I know and I appreciate the comfort that there is in getting back to normal. I understand that completely, but this is an opportunity we need to listen to children, have them think about, they're thinking about issues about freedom, about what it's like to be kind of stuck at home, to not be able to go out or very limited in what they're able to do when they go outside. There's another dimension in the sense of that many of them perhaps have much more kind of educational freedom in terms of time for when they do certain things. I would hope that educators focus on their concerns about freedom or their concerns about justice, about how some people have to work now, whereas other people don't have to work. Some people are getting through this easier than other people. Some people are suffering much more than others. We could focus on these ideas, take freedom, and then look at pieces of literature that address it. Look at social studies history where issues of freedom have been at the forefront. Look at science and math in terms of the development of technology that has impacted how we feel free or not. So kind of a somewhat of a more coherent view of our education that does justice to the bigger issues that maybe students are thinking more about right now. That would be my ideal, or a hope that would happen, and certainly try to encourage that with my own students and my own classes, rethinking how I put together a syllabus.
Well, like the idea of, just so I'm understanding, Joe, like that this moment is like like helping filter to the top some big ideas or questions or topics that matter, and that your hope is that those are going to be like the overarching ideas that can reframe what teaching, like what content and how we teach happens when we go back.
Yes, and this goes back to something Jessica said, I think, much earlier in the conversation, like rethinking the value, say, of the content. I mean, we want our students to learn. I want my children to learn their social studies. I want them to learn their English language arts. But they have been thrust into a situation, very traumatic experience in their lives, and perhaps they are thinking about some big questions. And when we go back to school, maybe the traditional curriculum could be processed or filtered through those ideas, and that teachers respect that they have been questioning those ideas, rather than that was a terrible experience, I missed you, let's get back to work. I think that would be unfortunate.
So like not to ignore those questions that
Yes,
they're going to follow us once we shift into whatever the next stage of this looks like, and to give space for those.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I also think that the crisis highlights the importance of every person. Um, so, every person's action has an impact, whether you're a small child or whether you're a retired adult. What you do impacts other people. And so, um, when we bring those questions back to the classroom, when we're back to face, the every question that a person has is important. The knowledge that each person has an impact on us all. And so it really kind of this experience embodies the importance of the way that each person thinks and why it's so important.
Mhm. Yeah, and creating spaces for us to share those experiences, because with that experience comes, an opportunity for learning and teaching, right? Like your experience of this moment is very different than mine, and we can talk about it now, but we can also talk about it in the future. So not to to forget like that stuff can also be used for teaching. Because right now it's hard to bring those things, for many of us, we don't have the bandwidth to process in the ways that we might be able to process or be creative in the future. So yeah, I think it would be a disservice not to think about creative ways that we can bring those back, but also to be intentional with what we're realizing now that we value. If it's the relationships, like you said, Jess, like how can I not get swept up when I go back to work and forget that those relationships and how I attend to those things needs to be different. Like I can't go back to my other habits perhaps that I had before. Yeah. Any other thoughts before we end?
This has been wonderful. I appreciate it. I guess maybe I would just to tack on to that, you're saying it's difficult to kind of process now. And I guess I'll say, speaking as a parent, to take a breath and to be kind of somewhat forgiving of ourselves, to try to keep remembering what our children are going through, and how stressful it is for them. And we're not their teachers, but we are their parents, and to be loving, be concerned about them and care for them, more than instruct them. And I think caring for them is part of caring for them is to let them speak, let them share and listen. And that's not easy. But let's try to start, just kind of take it day by day. And I think we'll all get better at it, and we'll all be better for it.
Yeah, I think having unreasonable expectations of our students or of ourselves or of our educators or of anyone, I think it feels more obvious now, right? Like there's only so long you can have those expectations until something completely crashes down and breaks them. And I'm hopeful that I can keep that moving forward, right? That I'm humble, but I'm also okay with acknowledging today is not a good day for me. I'm human too. And other people, I don't need to hide that maybe as much as I had before in ways, that don't cause undue stress or anxiety for our young ones, but that are helpful in modeling that, we all have to process things and we all struggle. Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right.
Well, if that's it, then let me just thank you very, very much, Ariel, Jessica. This has been a pleasure, and it's been helpful. And I hope that the audience has as well. This will be archived for posterity on Facebook, I believe, on the Young Philosophers page, on the Philosophy Learning and Teaching Organization page, Plato, and it'll be on the Google channel.
Yeah,
I wish everyone.
I'd love to hear comments, like even after we post this. Like,
Absolutely, please,
we
please.
talked about, like, I hope that this models kind of what we mean by creating space. Like, it doesn't have to be something that's broadcast to everyone, but like, what are your experiences right now, teaching, learning, working, and what can you learn from this moment, and how can you use it and be mindful and intentional moving forward? Yeah.
On that note, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you both so much.
Bye.
All right. Bye-bye. Stay well.
You too.
You too.